An hour ago, I held authority over a city's drowned districts, a laminated grid clipped to my vest, the seal of Emercom on my sleeve, and the right to order men back from a cracked overpass. Now my wrists answer to iron. The hands at the ends of them are not mine. Broader knuckles, a thumbnail split black, a callus mapping the haft of a tool I never lifted. A stranger's hands obeying my count. I count anyway. It is the first thing intact. 312. I do not yet know why the number arrives whole and labeled, only that it sits behind my eyes like a benchmark plaque set into bedrock, and that touching it, I find my mother's kitchen. The smell of the number 14 trolleybus, the exact weight of my drafting compass in a coat pocket. Each one filed, each one present, 312 of them, no more. A ledger of myself, audited and closed. The road under me is crushed dolomite, graded for hauling, 8 meters wide. I read it before I can stand. Old reflex. The camber falls left toward a cut ditch. The ruts run 2.5 meters on center for a cart axle. The dust is the pale gray of limestone country, and it has not rained in days. I know these things the way I knew the floodlines of the Yowza, by trade, by the muscle behind the eye. The chain that links my ankle to the man ahead is forged in 9-centimeter links. I measured it before I measured my grief. There was a subway. There was the ceiling coming down in slabs the color of wet ash, and the sound, and then no sound. I logged my own death the way I would log a structural failure. Load exceeded capacity. Failure at 6:14. Casualties to follow. I was a casualty. I followed. Iron on the wrist. A brand under the iron. The mark is seared into the soft skin above the left wrist bone. A glyph I do not read. The keloid raised and shiny and old enough that the body around it has stopped complaining. This body was a slave before I came to inhabit it. Whoever counted before me counted nothing. The eyes I look through have learned the floor. I raise them. That is the difference between us. The horizon is wrong. I knew it would be the moment I felt the ground refuse to agree with the light. A surveyor learns the quarrel between terrain and sky long before he can name it. And there, at the edge of the salt pan where the quarry road runs out, the line of distant hills is moving. Not heat shimmer, not cloud. The ridge slides north by a hand's width and stops. Slides again, the way a coastline redraws itself on a chart when the corrections come in. Except the chart is the world, and there is no draftsman I can see. A continent editing its own legend. The man ahead of me, gray rope of muscle, shoulders branded twice, has stopped hauling. 40 of us on the chain, give or take. I count 38 backs and assume 2 beyond the bend. All of them watching the hills walk. A herring gull, 200 kilometers from any sea it should know, beats overhead and screams once and banks, lost in a geography that changed beneath its wings. I take the bearing without a compass. East-northeast, the sun 2 fists up, the shadows of the haul cart laid down at 60-some degrees. The drifting ridge moves against true north at a rate I clock against my own pulse, and the pulse is a stranger's, faster than mine was, frightened in a way the mind riding it refuses to be. Distances steady me, they always have, from the brand to the wrist bone, 4 centimeters, from my ankle to the next man's, 1 meter 10 of chain, from here to the moving hills, I estimate 11 kilometers, and watch the estimate become a lie as the hills accept a new position and the salt pan stretches to meet them. The scale of the thing is not weather, it is cartography. Something is drawing, and the ground is obeying the drawing the way my hand once made a flood retreat by inking the contour where the sandbags would hold. 41 hours. The figure surfaces unbidden, exact, the way the memory count surfaced, the way the number 47 sits just under it. 47, a quantity of maps, a debt I have not yet been handed the pen to pay. I do not understand the arithmetic. I trust it the way I trust a benchmark I did not set, but can stand on. Knowledge installed in me like survey monuments, brass caps in concrete. 312. 47. 41. A legend for a country I have not been shown. Down the chain a whip cracks. Not at me. Yet. The overseer's voice comes in a language my new ears parse and my old mind does not, and the column lurches, and the chain snatches my ankle so the link bites, and I learn the precise tolerance of 9 centimeters of forged iron against bone. I haul. The cart rolls. The hills keep walking north. And I understand, with the cold clarity of a man reading a hairline crack widen across a load-bearing wall, that the world is being redrawn while I am chained to its margin, that the drift will not wait for me to learn the pen, that somewhere the count of 312 has already begun, quietly, to be spent. The cart jams in a rut, and the overseer turns his whip on the axle instead of our backs. Rest, of a kind. I take stock the way I would survey a site before the first stake goes in. What I hold, what I lack, what the ground will permit. In my right fist, taken without the decision to take it, a wedge of charcoal, broken from the cart's scorched brake block, 3 centimeters, soft enough to leave black on calluses that are not mine. Under my knees, a flagstone, limestone, worn mat, a meter to a side, bedded into the verge where the road masons once intended a drain that no water ever found. Flat as a drafting board. I have inked plans on worse. I count what is left. 312. The number arrives with its edges intact, and I run them the way a man runs a thumb along a steel rule to check for burrs. The smell of solder when my father reseated a kettle's handle. The precise weight of my drafting compass, brass and nickel. 210 grams in the palm. The way the Yowza in March went the color of weak tea under skim ice. Each one shelved, each one labeled. A closed archive I am forbidden to add to, and apparently licensed to spend. 41 hours. The countdown does not tick where I can hear it. It only sits, the way a benchmark sits, indifferent to whether I stand on it. 47 maps. That figure I cannot interrogate. It refuses to itemize itself, a sum without its line entries, and I have learned to trust totals I cannot yet break down. Every survey begins with a quantity you take on faith and prove with your feet. The hills are still walking. I watch one ridge accept a new northing while I crouch. 11 kilometers becoming 12, becoming a falsehood, and the logic of it closes in my chest like a caliper finding true width. The world is being drawn. The world obeys the drawing. I have spent my life making the inverse claim, that the drawing obeys the world, that a chart is a humble servant of terrain, and the inversion lands so cleanly I almost laugh, a dry click in a throat too parched for it. So, test the proposition. I set the charcoal to the flagstone and do not let my hand shake, because a shaking hand throws scale, and scale is the whole of it. I draw small, a rectangle for the stone I kneel on. A line east-northeast off its corner, the bearing I clocked against the sun, 2 fists up, shadows at 60-some degrees, and along that line I render what is not there, a cleft in the quarry wall, a passage 2 meters wide running through 40 meters of dolomite to the dead ground beyond the overseer's sightline. I draw it to scale, 1 centimeter of charcoal to 4 meters of stone. I notch a contour where the floor must fall, hatch the shadow side, mark the throat of it with the convention I have used 10,000 times for a culvert mouth. I do not pray over it. I close the legend. The flagstone warms under my knees. Not heat, a kind of attention, as if the rock had been asked a question in its own grammar and were turning to answer. Then the quarry wall 30 meters off makes a sound I have heard once, in the subway, in the half-second before the slabs. The groan of load finding a new path. No collapse follows, the opposite. Stone parts along the line I drew, dolomite drawing back from dolomite without dust, without rubble, the cleft opening exactly 2 meters at the mouth and narrowing as my hatching narrowed, a passage cut by a hand that owned no chisel. Something in me closes at the same instant, a door I cannot find the frame of. I reach for the kettle and the solder and my father's hands, and the count answers from a shelf gone suddenly bare. 311. I do not know what I paid. That is the cruelty engineered into the price. The erasure takes the memory and the memory of the memory, so I am left holding a receipt with the amount torn off, certain only that the ledger is 1 entry shorter and that I will never audit the loss. I kneel very still and let the arithmetic settle. 1 map. 1 memory. 40 kilometers of edited stone would cost me how much of myself? The scale governs the toll. The toll is paid in the only currency I arrived carrying, and the figure 47 stops being a mystery and becomes a sentence. 47 maps. 47 things gone that made me. The man ahead of me has turned. Gray rope of muscle, twice branded, eyes that have learned the floor. And now lifted, the way mine lifted, fixed on the cleft that was solid wall a breath ago. Down the chain, the others feel the slack change and look. 38 backs become 38 faces. The overseer is still cursing the axle, his back to the wall, deaf to the only true thing that has happened on this road in 100 years. I understand it then. The whole shape, the way a fault line finally legible in a wall of cracks resolves into one clean diagnosis. I am not chained to the margin of this world. I am the draftsman it has been waiting for, and the men beside me are not my fellow cargo, but the first crew of something the system has not yet found a word for, and every meter I free us will be cut out of my own remembered flesh, 47 times, until I have mapped a road home through the body of who I was. The smell goes first, and this time I am holding it as it leaves. Warm yeast, cut dill, the brown rim of milk left too long on the ring. My mother's kitchen, the whole of it landing in my nose, the way a benchmark lands under a boot, located and certain and mine. Then, a clean nothing, a square scraped blank where a feature used to sit. I reach back along the shelf, and my hand closes on the shape of a thing I can no longer open. 310. I had drawn the first map without learning yet what it would take. The cleft let us out at dead ground, but dead ground sat 2 meters below the salt pan's lip, and 38 men roped ankle to ankle do not climb sheer dolomite. So I knelt at the throat of the passage and rendered a riser, 6 steps, each rise a hand's width, each tread wide enough for a bare sole and a dragging link, drawn at 1 centimeter to half a meter, because a stair misscaled folds a step too tall to climb and spends the memory on a useless wall. The stone creased into stairs, precise stairs. The price, I found only after, was the kitchen. They climbed. The twice-branded man went up first, testing each tread with the ball of his foot the way I test rotten ice, and the chain paid out behind him, link by link. 38 bodies rising from a wall that had owned no door an hour before. No one spoke. On the pan, the wind took us flat and white to every horizon. No cart, no overseer. The quarry already a notch behind a ridge that was, by my reading of the drift, walking south to close the gap we had left. A crew now, not cargo. They looked to me. 38 faces that had read nothing but the floor for years turned to the man who had opened the wall, waiting to be told which way the ground would go next, and I understood that the iron at our ankles had stopped being a leash and become a keel. 1 length of chain holding 39 men into a single hull. I gave the order in a voice the brand had left raw. Point to the twice-branded man, the 2 oldest to the center of the line, the boy with the split lip behind me to carry the charcoal I had not yet spent. A guild assembled out of a slaver's tackle. The salt would not carry us. I have walked salt before. The crust lies over the brine the way skin lies over a wound, and 40 men in file would punch through and go into the thigh. I drew a road, not a track, a causeway, raised a half meter, running 1 full kilometer due north on the bearing my dead reckoning gave me, shrunk to fit the flagstone at 1 centimeter to 40 meters. Every contour honest, the crown cambered to shed the wet. I closed the legend. A kilometer of packed pale ground lifted from the pan without a sound, straight as a line snapped off a chalked string. The count dropped. 1. I knelt on the new road and ran the figures, because figures are the one thing this place cannot fold out from under me. The riser, 3 meters of edited stone, 1 memory. The causeway, 1,000 meters, 1 memory. The toll does not read the distance, it reads the sheet. 1 drawing, 1 fragment, whether I redraw a stair or a kilometer of pan. And when I forced the rate to confess itself, it came clean and merciless. A fragment to the kilometer. And everything short of a kilometer billed at that same whole fragment, rounded up against me. 3 meters, a kilometer, the same coin. I had paid 1,000 meters price to lift 6 steps and not known I was being overcharged. The lesson set like grout in a joint. Precision keeps the draw from failing. Scale decides what the unfailed draw is worth. A man with 309 fragments left must never again spend a kilometer to raise a staircase. Draw large. Draw once. Move all 38 the farthest a single sheet will carry, because the system will not be haggled with, only outscaled. 309. I let the crew breathe and reached, once, for the woman the kitchen had belonged to. I still held her hands, the chap across the knuckles, the wedding band gone thin as wire. I held the gray coming into her braid. The smell, though, was the thread I had always followed down to the rest of her, the way a contour leads the eye down slope until it finds the river. And with the thread cut, the rest of her lay on the page, true and disconnected, a legend with no map to pin it against. I set the stove in its corner. I could place the stove. I could not place her standing in front of it. North runs 900 kilometers to open water by the benchmark driven into my skull. I will spend her to get there. I will reach the sea having drawn every meter of the road myself, and I will not remember the house it led away from. The boy says a word, and I own it before he finishes the syllable. Tithe road. It arrives whole and brass-capped, the way the numbers came. Not learned, installed. Yesterday his mouth made weather. Today the weather has edges, declensions. A case for the road a lord is owed, and a separate case for the road a lord owes back. A verb meaning to walk under guard, and nothing else. I never took the grammar apart to know it. The tongue is not mine. The hands are not mine. The split thumbnail not mine. And I file the speech in the same drawer, the one marked borrowed, and keep the line moving north. The crew calls the dead country Veland. 300 years of it, the boy tells me, and I understand him, and despise how cheaply the understanding comes. A continent of holds and tithe roads, a post stone every Velish mile, each one cut with a crowned tally and the reckoned distance to the next seat. I had read of such arrangements once, on paper, in another skull. Now I walk them. Now they are wrong. The tongue gives me every word but one. I turn my wrist in the white glare, and the glyph above the bone, old keloid, 4 centimeters up, raised like a worm trapped under skin, stays shut to me. The flood names rooks and tithe roads, and the verb for walking under guard. It names the crown on the post stones, names the smith and the lime and the sheep. It does not name this. The mark predates Veland. Whoever said it owned a language older than the country that lost me, and the brand keeps its mouth closed. The post stones lie. We pass one at the causeway's end. Granite, knee-high, weathered to a soft tooth, 4 to some grandfather's seat scored under the crown. 4 miles. I cite the bearing it claims and find nothing on it. The seat is gone, slid south with its province the way the quarry ridge slid to close our gap, and the stone now points 4 honest miles at empty pan. The map and the ground have divorced. Everyone here still obeys the map. I can see why they cannot. The drift lies on the world's surface like a second skin, faint, and to a trained eye it reads plain as Hashur's. The land wears another land, half a hand to the left of itself, a chart printed twice with the plates knocked askew, and where the two disagree, the seam shows. A fence line ending in air, a streambed climbing uphill into its own older course. The crew walks the seams and feels only cold. I read them. Veland is not breaking. Veland has broken, and is still being told the news, province by province, at the speed of a sliding hill. The speed is climbing. I count it the only way I have. The ridge behind us moved its own width, call it 60 meters, in the hour of our climb. The post stone's lie is 4 miles and lengthening. A flight of rooks went over at dawn beating north, and by noon, a second flight beat south through the same air, because the wind they trusted had been edited out from under them. Yesterday the world drifted. Today it runs. Whatever tore the seam is widening it, and the 900 kilometers between me and open water are not 900 fixed things, but 900 things in motion, each free to walk off its bearing before I arrive. I will not chase a moving country. I will draw it still beneath us, sheet by sheet, and let the rest slide. The crew has begun to sort itself without my word, the two elders pacing the chain slack so no man is dragged off his feet, the twice-branded man reading my face the way I read the drift, the boy hoarding the break-block charcoal in a fold of his rag like a man guarding seed grain. 38 mouths, and among them perhaps 4 trades, a smith's nephew, a man who knew lime, a woman's son who had counted a lord's sheep and could therefore count anything. A hold has been raised from less. I am already drawing its legend in my head. Who carries water? Who carries the count? 900 kilometers, 309 fragments, a borrowed tongue naming a country that will not hold still to be named. If the ground slides faster than a man can walk it, what is a map worth? And how much of my mother do I burn to make one stay? The first hands to feed us belong to a deserter, not a lord. He comes out of the standing sedge, where the salt pan softens into brown water, a brace of coot hung by the hocks from his fist, and he does not run from 38 chained men. Corv. He gives the name before the trade, which marks the trade as one a man hangs for, a soldier's belt cut down to a peasant's width, the buckle ground clean of its crown, an army spear sawn to a fowler's length. He looks at the chain, he counts us, lips moving, the way I count, and arrives where I arrive and does not flinch. Behind him, the discarded, a fold of dead ground the maps forgot, a hand's breadth of country that slid into the seam and was not missed. That is where they live, in the margin, writing their small survival between the lines of a dead lord's page. I count the works before I count the people, because the works do not lie. Snares first, loops of twisted deer sinew set low in the runs through the sedge, each anchored to a bent willow that springs the catch clear of the foxes. Then the pits. 3 of them, dug to the depth of a tall man, the spoil carried off and scattered so the ground reads flat, the mouths lidded with reed mat and a finger of turf. This is not desperation, this is method. They have a bow, horn and ash spliced at the grip, strung with back sinew, the handle lapped in birch bark so it will not sweat and slip. A boy I do not yet have a name for has worn the first 2 fingers of his right hand to a shine on the string. They have a smokehouse, which is the thing that stops my breath, a beehive of river clay over a willow frame, green wood smoldering inside, and on the racks the split bodies of bream and coot going from wet red to a hard amber that will hold a month. Salt they have for the taking, a whole pan of it at the door. Smoke turns a day's luck into a winter. Someone here knew that before I came. They trade. A woman with a runaway's cropped ear, Veska, lays strips of the amber fish on a flat stone and counts them against a coil of sinew, a firebow drill, a fist of iron nails black with rust, the small wealth that moves between the folds of the broken country when 2 camps of the forgotten meet at dusk. She prices it without a scale, in her head, the way the shepherd's son among my 38 prices anything. Beside her sits the reason I will stay the night, a blind man, young, Dobrin, his eyes milk over a face that turns toward the drift the way a weather vane turns, not seeing the second land half a hand to the left, but feeling it, his palm flat to the dirt, naming the slide before it shows. Apprentice to a chartmaker, Veska says. The chartmaker is 3 provinces south now, or was, or is nowhere. I have spent my whole life among men who could read a country. These are the first since I died who can read this one. Corv reads ground for the ambush. Veska reads the worth of a thing down to the nail. Dobrin reads the seam under his hand the way I read it with my trained and stolen eye. And the boy at the bowstring reads the runs of the coot, and not one of them owns a chart, and they have lived. I take out no charcoal. I draw nothing. For one evening I only watch, and file each competence where a surveyor files a benchmark, fixed, trusted, a point a whole network can hang from. 38. I brought up the riser, 5 more here with hands worth keeping. A legend wants its symbols before it wants its ground. Dobrin turns his blind face to me across the smoke, as though my counting made a sound, and asks how far north I mean to drag a country that will not hold still long enough to be drawn. I do not answer Dobrin in his tongue. I kneel at the smokehouse and draw a well. Flat limestone for the sheet. Break block charcoal worn to the width of my thumb. The scale set at 1 centimeter to the meter because a shaft is a small vertical thing, and precision is the only thing that keeps a draw from failing. A circle 1 meter across, sunk 9 rings straight down to the gray water I can taste under the sedge. The spoil ringed out and tamped to a lip. I lift the charcoal. The ground takes it. No sound. The way there is never sound. The turf parts in a clean wheel. The walls go down sheer and damp and true. And at the 9th ring, the dark turns from dry to mirror. Water. A fragment closes. Count 308. I reach for the chap across my mother's knuckles and find the backs of her hands smooth now, the way river stones are smooth, scoured of whatever weather had made them hers. They come to the lip and look down and do not cheer, which I am grateful for. Veska lowers a cootskin on a sinew line, draws it up brimming, prices the water to no one with her lips moving over a sum that has no coin. Corv drinks last. He counts the cups the way I count the dead and finds the number good and says nothing, and that silence is the first plank of a thing I am building without naming it. North again at first light, the 38 unchained now in everything but the brand. By the 3rd day, the sedge gave out against a ridge no chart of mine had set there. Dolomite, a spine of it, 60 meters of broken gray stacked across the whole bearing, sheer where the drift had folded 2 slopes into one wall. A wall, due north, no way over with old men and a smokehouse lashed to a sledge. I draw it at 1 centimeter to 40 meters, the scale that carried the causeway. And I draw large because scale is worth, and worth is what I am spending. A notch cut clean through the spine. The rock parted into a ramped pass 40 meters wide, graded 1 in 12 so a loaded sledge can take it. The walls battered back so they will not shed stone on the crew beneath. 1 sheet, 1 fragment. The toll does not care that I moved a mountain instead of a meter. It reads the drawing, not the distance, and a mountain rendered small costs exactly what a doorway costs. The ridge opens like a ledger laid flat at its spine, and the wind the drift had trapped on the south face comes through cold and smelling of water still 890-odd kilometers off. Count 307. The gray goes out of her braid. I keep the braid. I no longer know what color ran under the gray. Corv walks the pass first, sounding the grade with his sawn spear butt, then turns and waves the sledge through. I watch the deserter set his shoulder to the sledge's tail and push, taking a slave camp's burden for his own count, his ground-crowned buckle catching the new light. The lines are doing the work I did not draw. By the fire that night, the boy with the string-shined fingers has scratched a circle and a shaft into a flat stone with a coot bone. My well, copied, the scale all wrong, and the want exactly right. Veska has begun to lay her fish in rows that follow the chalk mark I left at the smokehouse door, as if my legend were a fence the food agreed to stand inside. Dobrin sits with his palm flat to the new pass, reading it the way I read it, and finding it still. Truly still, the only still ground for a province in any direction. 3 competences I filed as benchmarks. 5 more hands. A fold of the forgotten. Learning to hang a whole survival from a point a stranger drove into nothing. Dobrin turns his milk eyes up from the stone and tells me the thing I had not let myself measure. The camp has stopped trusting the ground. They walk only where my chalk has been, not because they believe in me. He is precise about this, an apprentice's precision, but because the line holds when the world will not, and a people will follow the one surface that does not move out from under their feet, even 900 kilometers, even at a fragment a draw. A strip of birch bark, peeled in the dark and scraped over my knee until the inner face came up pale as a thumbnail, the charcoal cut to its finest corner against the limestone lip. This is the ledger. I have put off making it for 9 days. The rule is plain. Name the memory before the draw takes it. Set it down in full while I still hold it whole. I cannot keep the rule. The toll does not let me choose. I lift the charcoal and it reaches past my hand into the drawer and lifts out whatever it finds nearest the light. So I am always writing the label after, gumming a tag to a jar already emptied, never certain the word on the bark and the gone thing behind it ever sat on the same shelf. I write them anyway. The chap on her knuckles, like weather worked into oak. The gray in her braid, and under the gray, a color I no longer own. 2 lines. The bark holds them the way the salt held the causeway. Indifferent, true. I tell myself a closed boundary is better than an open one, that an absence with an edge can at least be measured, and that counting is the one thing this place has not yet learned to take from me. Corv watches me scratch the second line and asks what tongue it is. Mine, I tell him, from before. He cannot read it and does not pretend to. He sets a fresh coot on the smoke rack and lets me work. By the fire, the string-fingered boy has stopped copying my well and started copying my hand instead, the shapes of letters he cannot sound, and Veska keeps her own tally now on a rib bone. 1 notch a day the ground stays where my chalk left it. A people will measure what it fears to lose. I did not teach them that, I only showed them the bark. Dobrin finds me before light, palm flat to the cold sheet of the pass, and tells me the thing I built the ledger to avoid hearing. The draws are not hidden. I had drawn them small and thought small meant secret. I had read the toll and missed the plain clause beneath it, that a place held perfectly still in a province that will not stop sliding is not silence, but signal. A stake standing while everything around it walks. Dobrin reads it through his hand. So, he says, will anyone who reads the seam the way he does. The well, the pass, the kilometer of causeway, each one a bright nail hammered into a drifting board, findable from however far a man can lay his palm to the world and feel where it has stopped flinching. Stillness is a beacon. I made 4. The word came to me then, unasked, the way the numbers came and the body's split thumbnail came. Zvod, the binding of all charts into one lawful sheet. Zvodokart, the hand that keeps the binding. And a third word I had no slot for until that moment. A verb in the case one reserves for weather and for plagues, meaning to unmake a place so holy that no road ever ran to it, and no soul was ever owed the walking of that road. It arrived brass-capped and fully declined. I did not take it apart. I filed it where I file the hands and the braid, under borrowed, and the drawer took more weight than a drawer should. Veska came in at dusk from the forward snare line, breathing hard, and laid a thing on the stone by the fire. A post marker, pried whole from its socket 2 ridges north, its brass face newly cut, not weathered, not lying the old way, but corrected. A town's name burned out and the limestone beneath it planed smooth, the way you dress a board to write on it again. The name that stood there yesterday was gone. The people counted by it were gone. Along the planed place, fine as a surveyor's hairline and aimed due south down our own bearing, someone had scored a single straight rule toward the exact ground where a branded slave had begun drawing a new geometry into a country that was meant to belong only to them. The chain was the smaller claim. A man can be owned by a lord, walked under guard down a tithe road, branded at the wrist with a number a clerk reads in a breath. That ownership has an edge, a price, a column you can balance and close. What road toward me wanted no labor. It wanted the precedent struck out. The planed marker had said as much in the only grammar the wardens keep. Erase the town, dress the limestone smooth, score 1 hairline rule due south. So that the question was no longer whose hand held the charcoal, but whether any hand should have held a country at all. The tongue gave me the word before I reached for it. Prostor ears. It arrived brass-capped and fully declined. A noun case the way Velish cases crimes against the sheet and not against a body. The heresy of space. An author of geography the Svad never sanctioned. One who draws ground the binding does not own. I had no drawer for it, and the drawer took it regardless, heavier than the gray braid, heavier than the chapped knuckles, and as it seated, I felt the old mark above my wrist bone draw taut. the keloid, 4 centimeters up, raised like a worm under the skin, cold, naming nothing the installed tongue could pronounce. It does not itch. It has never itched in this borrowed body. It pulled tight anyway, as if a language older than Veland recognized the charge before Veland finished filing it. I climbed the pass to read the drift. Dobrin reads it through his palm. I read it the way I was trained, plain as hachures inked down a slope, the short strokes thick where the ground falls fastest, and the whole province falling now, sliding south and west off its true seat at a hand's width a day. The crew feels cold and calls it weather. I see the strokes. East of us, the drift ran the usual way, a sheet pulled slowly off a table. To the north, it did not. To the north, a wedge stood still inside the sliding. Not still as my well was still, not a nail of held ground hammered into a drifting board. This was stillness that moved, a clean-edged island of true map advancing across the lying country, and everything it crossed stopped flinching and lay down obedient under it, post stones snapping back to their honest bearings as it passed. I had read the drift for 9 days and never seen the law run backward. The wardens did not flee the rupture. They carried sanction the way a man carries a lantern, and where the cannon touched ground, the ground confessed and held. Cannon gray, the color of a sheet with the color burned off. I marked the wedge's leading edge against the third ridge and its trailing edge against the fourth and laid the span across my knuckles, a column of them, riding abreast. The stillness they bore, measuring perhaps 2 kilometers across and closing on the exact ground where a branded slave had begun cutting new geometry into a province meant to belong only to the binding. They had my bearing. The hairline on the planed marker and the wedge in the drift drew the same straight rule, and I stood at the end of it. I went down to the fire and did the arithmetic that was mine to do. Corv could hold a line. I had filed him as a benchmark days ago, a fixed point the others could hang from, and Veska beside him, and the string-fingered boy who copied my letters without sounding them, and Dobrin whose palm read what my eyes read. A legend is built before its ground. I had drawn 4 beacons by accident and lit myself on every one of them. Now I would have to draw a people on purpose, fast, with the charcoal cut to its finest corner, because a man flees a chain, but a heresy cannot flee. A heresy is unmade where it stands, with that third verb in the weather and plague case, so holy that no road ever ran to it and no soul was ever owed the walking. 307. I touched the count the way you touch a post to be sure it has not moved. I told them plainly. Corv set down the coot he was turning and did not ask twice. Veska notched the rib bone. 1 more day the ground had held. And then turned the bone over and started a second tally I had not asked for. And I understood it was a count of us, the living, the kind of number a faction keeps. The boy looked up from my letters. Dobrin pressed his palm flat to the cold sheet of the pass, held it, and went the gray of the planed stone. His hand had stopped reading the seam. It was reading the riders. The wedge, he said. It split. I followed his blind hand with my trained eye. The second arm of the wedge had peeled off the column, southwest, across ground I had not drawn and did not own. It ran low and clean-edged into the haze where the salt went soft, and it did not come for us. It went past. Toward a smudge of habitation I had logged on the first day and filed as already dying. Viazi. 19 roofs. I had counted them through the glass-cold air at first light. Tar paper and turf, a leaning bell frame with no bell, smoke standing in 4 thin gray ropes because 4 hearths still burned and the rest had gone to ash. A fish rack on the south edge where a single herring gull worked a split carp. Figures the size of barley grains moving between the well and the byre. A place with maybe a season left in it. The drift had it by the ankles, sliding it off true a hand's width a day, and no one there could read the strokes that said so. I laid the wedge's leading edge against the village's near roof tree. Then the cannon touched Viazi. I have watched ground confess, 9 days of it, post stones snapping back, a province lying down obedient under the gray. This was not that. The roads went first, the cart track and the path to the well, and the thread running south to wherever Viazzi sold its dried carp, all of them drawn back into the sheet like wetted twine pulled through cloth. And where a road had been, there was salt that had never known a foot. The roofs did not burn, they did not fall, they were simply no longer rendered. Smoke, bellframe, buyer, the gull on its rack rubbed off the way you lift a wrong symbol from a draft before the ink sets, the limestone beneath showing clean. No scream reached me. 1,100 meters and not one sound. There was nothing to scream from. You cannot cry out from a place the binding has decided was never bound. And the people did not die in Viazzi. Viazzi did not happen. The well did not happen. The 4 hearths and the barley grain figures did not happen. No path had ever led there. No one ever owed the journey. The drift closed over the seat where the village had sat. It slid on, smooth as scoured stone. I understood the shape of the war then, and it was small and exact. They were not hunting me. They were burning the ground I might stand on, the way you scrape a coast off a chart to deny a fleet its harbors, and a village too poor to garrison was cheaper to unmake than to hold. Cartography against cartography, my charcoal against their erasure, memory against the sheet. 307. I touched the count. It had not moved. The toll takes my mother, the svad takes everyone else. Veska had come up the pass behind me with the rib bone in her fist. She had been notching the living. One more day the ground held, then a second tally, the kind a faction keeps. She had counted Viazzi into it that morning. I watched her lips move now, subtracting. The bone turned in her fingers, the small scrapes she would have to make to take 19 roofs of strangers back out of the number of us. She did not make them. Her thumb found the notches and stopped. To scratch them out, she would have to agree they had been there. The world no longer agreed. Only the 5 of us did. Korv, Dobrin, the boy who copies my letters without sounding them, Veska, me. And that was the entire census of Viazzi. Korv asked how many. I told him. 19 roofs, 4 hearths, 1 gull. The gull was still circling. It had been out over the salt when its rack unmade, and it came back to the place the rack should be and found honest, empty air. And it banked, quartered the ground twice, and then it forgot. Gulls keep no ledgers, and beat off west toward open water, leaving the gray column to grind south down my exact bearing. I added the 19 to a tally the toll cannot reach and the SVOD cannot scrape. It is the one map they will never erase. It is also the only one with no road back. You draw very well for a thing that wears a number. He did not dismount. Cannon gray from collar to stirrup, a man of perhaps 50, clean-shaven, with the soft, unblemished hands of someone who has never carried what he orders carried. At his throat, a chain of office welded from small iron survey pins, link to link. Warden Inquisitor. He gave his name as Iskan, the way a man spends a coin he will not miss. The riders had closed a ring at 40 paces and grounded their lances. They did not crowd it. 8 of them. Behind me, Korv kept his fist on the rib bone he should never have let me sketch into his palm. Veska stood at my shoulder, lips still, counting the points of iron and refusing to set the number down. Dobrin pressed his hand flat to the salt and read the column through the seam. The boy held my birch bark ledger to his chest like a stone lifted from a fire. You think you are raising a country, Iskan said. You are opening a vein. I measured him instead of answering. The chain of pins, the clean nails, the horse that had not been ridden hard. He told the doctrine plainly, and the plainness was the worst of it. Ground obeys the chart only where a hand owns the ground. An unowned league is an undecided league, and the drift eats the undecided first. The province slides because too few stand above it holding title. Every road wants a master. A road no owns is a road already half rubbed out, and a village too poor to garrison is cheaper unmade than held. He said this without heat, the way I would log a grade too steep to cart. Viazzi had owned nothing. Viazzi was arithmetic. The world stays still, he said, because men like me refuse to let it move. You hand the chart down to slaves. You teach the barley grain figures to read the roads they walk. You know what a road becomes, once every foot on it believes it owns the way. I knew. He told me regardless, a road owned by all is a road owned by none, and a thing owned by none is a thing this VOD has already begun to forget. My still ground was not a country but a leak, 4 stakes standing where the binding wanted slack, and each freed hand I taught widened the undecided until the whole sheet went soft and ran. The hierarchy was the nail. Pull the reskirt from above the road, and the road slides off the board like a draftsman's rule knocked from a wet table. He had written down my bearing to drive the nail back in. He believed it kindness. I checked his survey against 9 days of mine. I found no error in it. That was what I sat with, there inside the ring of grounded lances. Not a lie I could refute, but a true thing I would not keep. His stillness was the stillness of Vayazi. 19 roofs made never built, 4 hearths made never lit, the herring gull quartering empty air over a rack that had been argued out of having happened. A province held flat by one hand above every road. No path the owner had not blessed. The salt does not slide, and the salt does not remember, and a man may walk it his whole life and never once owe the journey to anyone but the Lord who permits it. You can read this, Iskan said, and almost gently. You above all. Stop drawing. Stand above your 4 stakes as their master, swear them to the order, and I will let the ground you hold stay rendered. Refuse, and I rub it pale by the next tide. The keloid on my wrist pulled taut over the brand, the old number cinching as the heresy seated itself in the air. I felt the offer for what it was, a seat above the road, bought with the road. I thought of the count. 307, of my mother's braid that I keep without knowing the color under the gray, of the ledger against the boy's ribs, every loss labeled after the fact in a tongue this man could not read. Iskan offered me a world that stays still. I had measured what stillness costs, and the bill was written in roofs. I crouched. I set the break block charcoal to the limestone at the ring's edge, where the salt went honest and clean, and I drew the first stroke of a road no tray would ever stand above. A thin line running north, toward open water, scaled so the toll would read it and take its piece of me, and ask no permission of the man on the horse. The line held. I drew the next. The column crested the grade before I closed the second verse. 40 souls, perhaps 50. They poured down the thin line I was still drawing, barefoot over green charcoal. A hamlet's worth of the unowned spilled out ahead of a wedge that had marked them for arithmetic and not yet reached the marking. They carried what a body carries when the roads behind it are being argued out of having run. A hen clamped under one arm, a grandmother born on an unhinged door, a boy gripping a hoe worn down to a knuckle of iron. The road held under their feet. Iskan did not move. He sat his unwearied horse and watched his own bearing fill with the people his order had loosed. And I read the trap in it. A road I would not let him own was a road he could let starve. 50 mouths walking onto 4 stakes that fed nobody. The leak proving itself by drowning. Let them come, and the still ground breaks under the weight. Turn them back, and I am the Rosca Liborda after all, blessing who walks. I did neither. I drew. I scaled the line longer than I had dared, past the well, past the pass, a full league of held ground threaded for 50 pairs of feet, the break block paring to powder under my thumb, the limestone taking each stroke the way salt takes a stake driven true. The toll came for its piece. I braced the count. I reached, the way I reach every time, for my mother. Offered the part in my hand so the part I could not see might stay. It did not take her. Something nearer the light lifted instead. A platform. Tile laid in a pattern I had crossed 10,000 mornings. The grit of it, the cold lip of a step. A jacket with reflective tape across the back and a word stitched at the breast in the letters of my first country. A sound building in the dark overhead. A weight of poured concrete deciding all at once to come down. And then the shelf where that stood was swept bare, a tag gummed to it and nothing behind the tag. I knew I had died. I no longer knew how. The detail of it, the where, the train, the falling, the last work my hands did before this body, lifted away entire. And what stayed was the fact alone, dry as a survey note. A man ended, somewhere, in a dark that fell. The shape of him kept. The ground beneath him went. No platform now. No country behind the country. The column reached the still salt. Veska counted them onto the ledger of the living, lips moving. 51 with the grandmother who had outlasted her door. I took the birch bark from the boy, charcoal to its finest corner. I wrote in the tongue Corv cannot read, the tongue I am no longer certain is mine, and I wrote it after the fact. A tag for a jar already poured out. 306. The place the dark came down on me. I cannot say where it stood or what my hands were doing when it fell. 3 entries. My mother's knuckles. The gray in her braid. Under both of them, freshly pale, the door I came through, unhinged and carried off, like the grandmother's, by no one I can name. I should have felt the floor go. I felt the charcoal, the cold, the count. Iskan watched me write and did not read the letters, but he read the act. A man taking inventory of his own subtraction. And something in his clean face settled, as if he had seen this sum balance before in another hand. You see, he said, only that. I capped the charcoal. North still ran, the road still carried the 51, and the 4 stakes were 5 things standing where the binding wanted slack. And I was the hand that kept them. Svodokart. The word brass-capped behind my eyes, borrowed and never given back. The faction the salt had grown was a census now. A deserter, a runaway, a blind man reading the seam by palm, a boy with my ledger against his ribs, and 51 strangers who owned nothing and walked anyway. Down at the bottom of me, where the platform used to stand, there was a clean-cut edge, and past it, nothing I could survey. A man with no upstream. I had measured the cost of stillness in roofs, and the cost of the road in pieces of a woman, and I had not, until the count read 306, measured the last thing, what it cost to be the one fixed point in a sliding province that no longer remembers, and cannot be made to remember, the country it was drawn from. For 100 kilometers I had measured myself toward absence. Now I spent the other way. Dobrin had given me the law, and I had refused to hear it twice. A held thing in a sliding province is not hidden but lit, a stake standing while the country walks, found by any palm that reads the seam. I had made 4 and called them small, as if small were a synonym for secret. I stopped calling them small. If the binding could read my still ground across the whole sliding sheet, then I would quit drawing to vanish and begin drawing to summon. Loud lines, public seams, structures no head stand-in had sanctioned that the unowned could reach before the wedge could. I drew a bridge. The dry gorge had turned us back twice, 40 meters of fault with a thread of green water at its floor, and a wind off it that smelled of wet flint and old rope. I set the brake block to the lipstone and drew the span the way I would have staked it alive. Deck, 2 piers, a camber pitched to shed the rain northeast. The limestone took it. The toll reached for me, and this once, I did not grope after my mother and brace against the theft. I opened my hand and chose the coin myself, gave up the smell of bread from a Sunday I could no longer date, paid it like a known price at a known scale. 305. A cart could cross where a goat had balked. That was the whole reversal, level as a sighted line. I no longer waited to be robbed. I budgeted. Corv understood before I said it. He walked the new deck heel to toe, counting paces under his breath the way a man counts who has marched for masters and means never to again. And when he reached the far pier, he turned and looked at me, not up, not down, the flat measuring look of one professional reading another's work and finding it true. He started posting the 51 to tasks. Water here, hens there, the grandmother off her door and onto a litter that 2 boys could trade. I drew a corridor next. A walled cut, 3 leagues long, threaded between 2 ridgelines so the wind could not strip a column crossing the salt. I drew a fold of held ground behind the pass, with 1 mouth and a spring, a sanctuary a warden arm would have to file before it could sweep. Each line came off the count like coin off a stack. 304. The gray of a coat I had owned in the first country. 303. The exact weight of a hand on my shoulder I would now never place again. I wrote each loss after the act, on the boy's birch bark, in the tongue Corv cannot read, and I am no longer sure is mine. The ledger lengthened. The man behind it thinned. Veska kept the other ledger, the one that adds. She moved down the column at dusk with a charred stick and a strip of bark, touching each shoulder, mouthing the number, and the number climbed where mine fell. A strange double entry, my memories the debit, and these walking strangers the credit. The same fault paying out in two currencies at once. 60 now, then 64. A potter, his wheel slung on his back. Two brothers who had walked out of a town the binding had already argued out of having stood. They began to look to me. Not with the eyes a slave keeps for the man who holds the brand. 4 centimeters above my wrist bone, the keloid drew taut and cold each time the drawer seated, naming nothing the installed tongue could pronounce, recognizing the charge before Veland finished filing it. They looked the way men look at a kept landmark when the country has gone fluid. Here is the thing that will be where it was. Svodokart, the brass word said behind my eyes, the hand that keeps the binding. I had not asked for the office. The office had grown around me like rind. Prostor eres, the other word said, the heresy of space. An author of ground the sheet does not own. I had stopped reading it as a sentence against me. I had begun to read it as a description of work. Iskan's arm did not advance into a sanctuary it had not yet filed. It sat at the salt's edge through 2 dawns, 8 horses cropping nothing, and watched a leak it had built to starve instead lay road and well and wall and feed. On the 3rd dawn, Dobrin came across the new deck with both palms open and laid them flat to the limestone where the seam ran cold and held there longer than he had ever held. Said, "Not to me, at me. It isn't the wedge." I knelt and put my own hand beside his. Under the stone, faint as a far train, the seam carried feet. Many. Walking toward the beacon I had made, and not away. I started keeping a ratio. Souls moved north over memory spent, the way a powder man keeps yardage broken against the charge he lays, and I wrote it small in the corner of each fresh sheet before the charcoal touched stone. Freedom per memory. The first time that quotient sat finished under my hand, I understood I had become a thing I would once have filed a report against. The toll does not read distance. I learned that on the western grade, where a kitchen no wider than my 2 spread hands cost the same as a league of road. It reads the sheet's ambition instead, the reach of the thing, not its footprint. A short line drawn honest takes a shallow coin, while a summoning, a span, a wind corridor, a fold of held ground with its own cold spring takes a deep one, dredged up from where the dear things sit packed. So I sorted myself by price. I will not soften this, because softening is a lie, and I have sworn off lies the way this country cannot. I laid my life out like bonded stock in a yard and tagged each piece with what it would buy. The cheap shelf I counted first, a tram's route number, the price of cigarettes in a year I no longer need, the chorus of a song whose verses had already gone, the taste of stewed canteen tea from a tin that burned the lip, coins I could spend without bleeding. I spent them on the many. A ford, drawn at the gorge's shallow knee, cost me the tram number and let 12 cross dry who had been going to wade. That is a good rate. I wrote it down. A switchback cut into the salt ridge, 4 gentle returns where the slope had been a wall, cost the canteen tea, and carried the grandmother's litter up on the shoulders of 2 boys who no longer had to choose her against their own wind. Veska touched the column at dusk with her charred stick, mouthing the climb. 70, then 73, and the arithmetic ran both ways across the same fault. Myself the debit, her strangers the credit. A slaughter ledger kept backward, 1 man subtracted to sum a crowd. I optimized. I am not ashamed of the word, I am ashamed of how well it fit. Each dawn I priced the day's works against the cheap shelf and drew only what the shallow coins could cover, hoarding the deep ones the way a starving man palms the last hard heel of bread and hates his own fist for closing. The grandmother's word for the sea, my mother's kitchen, already spent, its color gone with it. How I died, which the toll had taken whole and left me only the bare fact that I had. These I would not break for a footbridge. These bought leagues, and I could not yet say which leagues were worth them. Corv worked the credit side into shape. He read my drawn ground like a foreman reads a site, set the potter to clay near the spring, the two argued out brothers to the wall, the bow boy to the birch bark count, and made of the 73 a thing with stations instead of a herd with fear. A faction grows the way a callus does, under pressure, around a hard place. The feet under the stone changed the sum. Dobrin had read them at dawn, many and walking toward, and a beacon that draws is a mouth that must be fed. More fords, more wall, more spring than 73 would ever drink. I repriced the whole north against arrivals I had not met. At night, I did the monstrous arithmetic aloud in the borrowed tongue. If a ford frees 12 for a tram number and a bridge frees 40 for a Sunday's loaf, then a man is worth so many meters of honest deck, so many cleared lungs, so many litters no one need set down. The keloid 4 centimeters above my wrist bone drew taut and cold each time I priced a memory I had not yet sold, as if a language older than Valand read the invoice before I wrote it. Engineer the toll the way you once engineered cut and fill. Balance the haul, waste nothing. Then I counted the cheap shelf to its end, 29 coins. I went down them twice in the dark to be sure, the way you rechain a doubtful distance, a smell, a number, a face I did not love, a street I had walked once. Past them stood only the dear things, packed and waiting to be broken for road. North was 900 kilometers. What did I think I was going to pay the last league with? You called me by the wall, Corv said. Not my name. The wall. He had stationed the argued-out brothers there himself, mortared the seam between them with work. He knew exactly what he was to me, and I had reached for the word that held him and found the slot swept clean. K. A hard sound at the front. The rest gone the way the kitchen's color went, without a sound. A drawer pulled open onto nothing. I had not sold it. That was the new arithmetic, and it was worse than the old. The cheap shelf was bare board, 29 coins spent to the grain. And still, the toll had reached past where I kept my small change into the rack where the living were filed, lifting a name I used 20 times a day and leaving the man in front of me holding his own face the way a stranger holds a lantern at a stranger's door. The keloid 4 centimeters above my wrist bone drew taut and cold. It named nothing the tongue could pronounce. It had always known the charge before Veland finished filing it, and now it confirmed the debit on a memory I had refused to sell. Corv, I said when the sound came back. Late. He had already turned to the wall. Veska kept the count, and I lost the counters. I asked a runaway with a charred stick how many crossed at dusk and called her by the dead woman's name, the grandmother we'd carried up the switchback on 2 boys' shoulders, and her hand went still on the column at 73, knuckles white around the char. Children learn fast which adults have begun to come apart. She did not correct me. That was the worse mercy. The dear things I had hoarded for leagues began to go without my hand on them. I had kept Vyazi. The 5 of us were its only census. When the wedge unmade the village, we became the last sheet that said it stood, and each night I re-walked their faces the way you re-chain a doubtful traverse. The potter's wife with the burn scar, the well-keeper, the boy who. I reached for him and found gorge, clean-edged, honest, empty where a face had been mortared in. This was not the toll. The toll takes only what I spend. This was Iskan, and he had read my ledger better than I had hidden it. Dobrin found it first, palm flat to the seam at false dawn, his blind face tilting the way a man tilts to a sound under the floor. The wedge had stopped advancing on stillness and started advancing on memory, 2 kilometers across, riding abreast, and where it touched the drawn roads, it did not break them with the weather and plague verb. It unremembered them. It struck the author, not the sheet, erased the man who held the ground, and the ground forgets it was ever held. The ford went first. 40 had crossed dry. The 41st stood mid-gorge on a deck I could no longer recall drawing, and the deck, finding no author, lay down into honest stone 4 meters below true. We hauled him up on the litter rope. His ankle bent the wrong way, and Corv splinted it with birch lath and did not look at me. I redrew the ford and paid for it twice. Once in a coin I no longer had, once in a name I would not know I'd lost until I called for it and got the lamp-out silence back. So Corv built memory out of more than one head. He set the bowboy to read the ledger aloud at every return of the switchback, the 73 names and the count beside them. Birch bark passed hand to hand, so the tally lived outside my failing skull where no wedge could reach the author of it. He made the column walk close and name each other by the hour. A faction is a way of remembering together what one man can no longer hold. He understood this before I had words for it. He stationed the remembering the way he stationed men at a wall. I drew the sanctuary fold again, the one Iskin's arm cannot sweep because it has no file, and inside it the cold spring still ran, and for one held hour the wedge stalled at its honest edge, and the ground beneath the 73 did not confess. Then Dobrin lifted his palm from the seam. "It split," he said. "Two now." 2 columns of true map, advancing abreast on the same straight rule the planed marker had written. One aimed at the road, one aimed at me, both closing on my exact bearing. I went to count what I had left to pay the last leagues with, and could not finish the count. A number went out under my hand like a snuffed wick. I did not know whether it had been a memory or a man, and I understood that soon I would not be able to tell, and then there would be no one left in me to keep the difference. The man with the splinted ankle crawled north before the others woke, dragging the birch lath behind him like a broken oar, and at the 3rd post stone, he set his palm flat to the seam and held it there for the wedge to read. Dobrin felt it through the ground. "He's giving them us," he said. His blind face turned to the exact spot where a hand pressed honest stone and fed the column the one figure it still lacked, our remove from true to the meter. I had hauled that man up the gorge myself, 41st across, ankle bent the wrong way, splinted in Corv's birch and Corv's silence. He sold the bearing back at first light, not for coin, for a file. Iskon's promise that a man who names the leak gets sanctioned, entered, kept, that the wedge passes over the catalogued the way weather passes over a roofed house. He would rather be written down than unremembered. I could not, with the half a self I had left, find the place in me that wanted to call it cowardice. 2 columns, abreast, 2 kilometers each. Now they had the number. A bearing is only deadly if it stays true. I had drawn ground still for 90 days because stillness was the one honest thing in a sliding country. The discipline had kept the 73 alive and kept the wedge hunting a fixed mark. The fixed mark was the trap. So I broke my own first law. I knelt and drew the sanctuary to walk. Not a fold pinned to a spring and a cold edge, a fold that traveled, a 200-meter island of true map that moved north at the pace of a grandmother on a litter, carrying its own bearing with it, so the figure the ankle man had sold went stale by a hand's width an hour. Corv read the sketch over my shoulder and understood before I finished the legend. He set the bowboy to walk the ledger at the column's center, the 73 names read aloud on the hour, the tally living in 3 skulls now, and not one. A people you can carry is a people the wedge cannot fix. He stationed the remembering the way he'd once stationed spears. I budgeted the toll. I always budget the toll. The cheap shelf was bare, 29 coins spent to the grain, weeks gone. For a walking sanctuary, the toll dredged, and dredging it went, past the dear things I'd ranked and roped, past the grandmother's name for deep water, past my mother's kitchen, down to the coin beneath all the others, the one I had never thought to price because everything else was stacked on top of it. I felt it lift while my hand was still moving. A kitchen table, not my mother's, an aunt's, the spring I was 9, the river over the footbridge and the rescue trucks grinding the wrong high road in the dark because the only district map lay a kilometer off true, and a woman 2 streets over drowned in her own front room, waiting for headlights that took the long way around. I had a pencil stub. I redrew the district by lamp that night so the paper would stop lying. That was the hour I became a man who makes true ground out of false. That was the why. The drawer opened. The drawer took it. The fold seated. The island lifted off its pins and began to walk, and the 73 walked inside it, and the ankle man's number rotted behind us at a hand's width an hour, exactly as drawn. It held. Dobrin's palm came up clean. Moving, he said. They're chasing a place that isn't. The campaign was sound. I checked it the way I check a traverse. The column closed up, the ledger read, Veska's count at 73 and steady, Corv's wall of men set at the fold's trailing edge where the wedge would bite first. Every stake true. I drove the next one north by the third ridge, and the ground confessed and held. Then I stood in the working sanctuary I had paid everything to build, and tried to find the reason I had paid. North. Open water. 900 kilometers, fewer now. I knew the figures the way I knew the brand 4 centimeters above my wrist bone, cold, naming nothing. I knew I drew true ground because the binding lied, and someone had to. I reached behind that for the first cause, the lamp lit at the bottom of all of it, the night, the pencil, the woman who drowned a kilometer from a map and got the snuffed wick silence back. A debit on a memory I had never agreed to sell. The mission stood. The reason it stood was gone. I did not weep because there was no longer anyone inside me who remembered learning how. I picked up the charred stick, found the bowboy, and told him to write a new line at the head of the ledger. Why we go north. He waited, pencil wet. I had nothing to give him for it, so I told him to leave it blank and walk. And the column walked, and I went with it because the road obeyed. And that was all the why I had left. 11 hours of light, 12 sheets to bind a country no emperor had signed. The brand sat 4 centimeters above Artyom's wrist bone, the iron's old letter cold against the tendon, and an hour ago it had named a chattel. Now the chattel meant to draw the rule the chattel was sold under and rule it back. He laid 3 planed boards on a door set across 2 ammunition crates, squared the corners with a plumb string and a borrowed mason's level, and began the master atlas the way he had once begun a flood survey. Datum first, the known edge before the unknown. Corv emptied the tent of all but the makers. He had built the crew the way he once dressed a shield line, each body to its bearing. Veska on the tally, calling 73 on the half hour in a voice that did not shake. The bowboy at Artyom's left elbow, trimming each sheet to a hand and a half with a skinning knife he stropped twice on his boot between cuts. 2 freedwomen grinding oak gall and iron filings into ink inside a brass shell casing because no one in a burned country had thought to flee with a proper pot. Dobrin held the flap, palm out, counting how many ridges the wedge still had to cross. Artyom inked the first sheet, and the northern littoral came true under the nib. Lying coast set down honest, the post stones in his mind snapping to the bearings an empire had bent. And when the last line closed the figure, the sheet seated, and something lifted out of him clean as a drawn tooth. The bowboy said his name. Artyom watched his mouth make the shape of it. He could not hear what his voice had sounded like. The boy was a stride off, talking, the words plain enough, the grain behind them. The particular timbre he had heard read 73 names aloud on the hour for 100 days was a debit posted to an account he never opened. He wrote the receipt the only way he knew. He noted it in the margin. Voice of the apprentice, spent. Second sheet, the Eastern Grain Provinces, freed. He drew the watershed and the road that would obey no throne, and as the boundary closed, he reached for the word a man uses for the place he returns to at dark, the word with a hearth folded inside it, and the word was not there. A clean socket where a tooth had been, the tongue finding only smooth gum. He had the thing still. He could draw the thing. He set the symbol on the legend, a square with a stroke for a roof, and could not say aloud what it was called, and the bowboy, who could not lend him his voice because Artyom had already spent the memory of it, wrote the word beside his mark so the atlas would carry what its author no longer could. Korv decided the order. They had no throne to argue under, so the makers argued over the door table. Grain east to feed the 73, or salt north to open the water. Veska said feed them. Korv said free the road or no one eats. Artyom drew the road, because a faction is only the order in which you spend what cannot be got back. And he let the men he had made choose that order. No longer sure the order he'd choose was still his. Third sheet cost him his hands. Not the hands. The hands kept working, knuckle and tendon, the borrowed body's 10 fingers closing the southern marshes into law. What went was the picture of them, the shape his own hands had held before a subway platform came down on the far side of a death. The Emercom cartographer's hands, the ones that drew a district by lamp the night a woman drowned a kilometer from a true map. He looked at the fingers inking the marsh and did not know whose they were. He had drawn so many shapes true, he could no longer call up, from memory, the instrument that drew them. He kept inking. A man does not halt a traverse to mourn the transit. The fourth sheet seated, and the fifth, and the freedwomen mixed faster, and Korv set 2 men to walk the dissolving edge so no straggler fell off the world while he worked. The atlas had weight now. He bound sheet to sheet with waxed linen through 3 stab holes, the way the bowboy had shown him from a thing he once watched a temple scribe do, the spine thickening under his thumb, province on province, a free country accreting one detonation at a time. Then he did the arithmetic. He always does the arithmetic. He touched the floor of himself and counted what coins were left to spend, and the count came back small and final and short. 5 memories he could still find, against 7 sheets undrawn. The atlas would outlive its maker by 2 provinces. He would run out of self before he ran out of empire to free. The heart had no edge. They walked into it the way you walk into fog off a cold sea. No line to cross, only a thickening, the cannon underfoot trading places with the drift so often that Artyom stopped trusting the ground to answer his nib. He counted his paces. Old habit, and the only ruler the place left him. 1,040 to the first dead oak, its bark gone the color of a healed burn, its rings spiraling outward instead of nesting, growth that had forgotten which way time pulled. Korv halted the 73 at the tree line. He set the makers along a granite spur in the old shield order, 2 on the dissolving edge, so no straggler walked off the world. The freedwomen behind a fallen trunk with the brass casing of ink between their knees. No one passed the dead oak until the place was red. Korv had learned that from him, the way a wall learns the shape of what leans on it. Dobrin read it first, palm to the air, not the ground. The blind man turned a slow quarter and stopped facing inward, and said the seam did not run through here, it drained here. Every bent bearing in the country tilted downhill toward this one point, the way water finds the low stone in a flooded room. The cartographic heart, the continent's keystone, and the wedge had chosen it to die on. 8 lances stood grounded in a ring at the center, Iskan's first arm, the same iron from Viazi, planted point down in soil that smoked where it touched. They did not advance. A master defending the one nail that holds the wall can stand still and let the wall walk to him. Artyom counted them, marked their interval, 9 paces even, drilled, and did not go at them. He went past. Lower, under the smoke, where Dobrin's hand had bent towards something the lances were not guarding so much as keeping, a cage. Roots of black ironwood grown through and around iron bars until he could no longer tell which the empire had forged and which the forest had volunteered. The whole knot sunk into a pit the width of a threshing floor, and inside it, breathing, a thing the size of a draft horse folded down small. He had no word left for what it was. The word for home was already gone. This was not that kind of loss, only a plain blank where a name should sit. He recorded what he could measure instead. 6 legs, or 4 and 2 that had been broken and set wrong. A coat the gray of wet ash. one eye open, amber, tracking him with the flat patience of an animal that has stopped expecting the next thing to be mercy. The rot ran out from the cage in rings. He saw it now. The spiral oaks, the bent bearings, the drift draining downhill. All of it leaking from this caged center, the way pus leaks from a wound that has been bound too long and never cleaned. They had chained the thing to hold the world still. The chain was the sickness. He named it because counting needs a column head. Shenya. He wrote it in the margin where the bowboy could see, and the boy wrote it again in his own hand so the atlas would keep it after Artyom could not. The beast did not move when he crouched at the bars. Its ribs showed through the ash-gray coat like the frames of a half-built hull. Whatever the Empire fed a god to keep it docile, they had stopped, or never started. He had 5 memories left and 7 sheets undrawn. He did not spend one. He reached into the satchel instead and took out a fistful of barley from the eastern grain the makers carried, the provinces he had freed and could no longer say the name of, and he laid the grain on the flat of his palm and pushed it slow between the bars. The amber eye moved to his hand. Not to him, to the hand. It did not eat. A long time passed. He counted it in his own pulse against the brand at his wrist. 200 beats. 3. Before the great head lowered and the lips, dry and split, took the barley off his palm with a delicacy that did not match the ruin of the body. The breath off it was cold. Colder than the iron had been the day they branded him. Cold the way deep water is cold a kilometer down where no map reaches. He fed it again. Behind him, Veska called the half hour. 73. And the number held. And Korv's shield line held. And the 8 lances stood in their even ring and let him. That was the part he could not enter in any column. They were watching him feed it, and they were not stopping him. He set a 3rd fistful on his palm and held still while the cold breath found it. The wedge had come here to make a last stand on the world's broken nail. So why would Iskon, who scraped villages off the charts to deny a fleet its harbors, stand by and watch a thing that wears a number put food into the mouth of the very wound they had crossed a country to guard? The voice came from behind the 8 lances, dry as chalk dragged on slate. Keep feeding her, it said. A god eats slower when it has learned to fear the hand. He set the 4th fistful before he stood. Then he counted the man who walked out from between 2 grounded lances, old, unarmored, a satchel at the hip cut to the same pattern as his own. And where Artyom carried charcoal, this one carried a stylus of white bone worn to a finger's grip. Not a soldier. The lances tipped their points toward the soil as he passed, the way iron leans into a magnet, and Artyom understood that Iskon had never been the architect, only the arm. Vale, you drew the first cheat, Artyom wrote on the limestone at his knee, because the toll had taken the sound of his voice 4 memories back, and the bowboy read it across the pit in the flat manner of a clerk reading a manifest. Vale did not deny it. He came to the bars and crouched, knees cracking like green wood, and looked at the barley still pressed to the beast's split lip. I drew all of them, he said. The coast where you were born, the river that names some town you can no longer say, the grade that took your mother's kitchen the day they branded you. Every road answers to my legend. Shenya answers to me also, he tapped the ironwood. She is the ground. I am the hand that holds the ground still. The amber eye closed, opened, tracked the bone stylus and not the man. Artyom wrote one word. Why? Because a chart wants to slide, Vale said. And a chart at rest is a chart somebody owns. 60 years I kept the seam from draining by keeping her hungry, since a full beast pulls and an empty one only aches, and an ache holds still. He turned the stylus once. You have 7 sheets undrawn. I counted your satchel from across the smoke. You will not finish them. The cold breath found Artyom's emptied palm and stayed there. You know the rule. The toll reads the size of the wanting, never the size of the land. A road costs a kitchen. A sanctuary costs a keystone. Your atlas wants to unmake the cannon itself, and the cannon is the largest thing a man can hold, so the toll will reach past every memory you have left and take the one you cannot draw without. He gestured at the charcoal, the brand, the chalked words still wet on the stone, the one that says, "These are your hands," who held the stylus. The name behind the number. A pause, measured in the beast's slow breathing. The last sheets cost yourself. You will bind the country, and you will not know you bound it. A free coast, and no Artyom standing on it. He had counted many costs. This was a new column. Veska called the half hour from the rim. 73. The number held, and he wrote it small in the corner, the way a man sets a hand flat to confirm the floor is still there. Then the beast moved, not toward the grain. Shenya lifted her ruined head, 6 legs shifting in the pit muck, and pressed the flat of her brow to the ironwood nearest his chalk, against the fresh word, the place his hand had just been, and held, breathing her kilometer-deep cold across the marks. Vale's stylus went still. Something moved in the old man's face that Artyom recorded without grasping. A tightening at the mouth, the look of a surveyor who finds his own benchmark shifted overnight. He read it then. He read it the way Dobrin read a seam, by the bend of everything draining toward it. She did not lean toward what fed her. She leaned toward the hand that had stopped expecting anything back, toward writing made by a man already half scraped away, toward the one creature in 60 years who had reached between the bars, wanting nothing the toll could price. The chain was the sickness. Vale had named the hunger wrong. She had not been starved of barley. She had been starved of a single hand arriving without a leash, and the rot leaking uphill through the spiral oaks was not the beast straining against the iron. It was the beast straining toward anyone who would stand at the bars and refuse to own her. The curse drained downhill to one low stone, and the low stone was this. The world rotted because the thing that held it had never once been touched as itself. He looked at the brand on his wrist, then at the charcoal, then at the amber eye, lifted now, for the first time, off his hand and resting on his face. She knew him. Before the sheet that would take it, something in this country already held his name. The iron comes off her on the 3rd morning. No signs for it. He files the ironwood pen with the edge of the bone stylus. Slow. A quarter turn and a pause. A quarter turn and a pause. The way a man worries a survey stake loose from frost-locked clay. And when the pen drops into the muck without sound, Shenya does not bolt. She folds her 6 legs, joint over joint, and lowers the draft horse weight of her skull to the wet stone beside his knee, breathing her kilometer-deep cold across the limestone where the chalk is drying to a pale crust. The seam stops draining downhill. He marks it, a tick, a depth, the hour. The rim where the spiral oaks had gone the color of old bruise begins, by the hour, to hold its green. Leaf by leaf, the way frost retreats from a south-facing wall. 6th sheet. He draws the western shelf, the broken teeth of the coast where, a town. He had a town once. The toll took its name some columns back. And the line answers, true to the hand's old discipline. Shenya leans the cold of her flank against the drawing. The rot does not come. 5 memories, then 4. The 7th sheet cost him the morning he learned to read a contour. The close-stacked rings on the page resolving, all at once, into the slope of a true hill. He sets it down without ceremony, the way you pay a ferryman, coin laid in the palm without a word, and keeps the stylus moving north along the 8th sheet's edge. They are building while he dissolves. The deserters lash spiral oak into a rack, green wood to green wood, so the 12 sheets can stand upright and be read like a deed. Veska teaches the children the legend's symbols by scratching them in ash, the small hands copying the marks for water, for grade, for shore. The bow boy keeps a second ledger now, of who is eaten, who can walk, which league of coast holds. A village the binding decided never happened is teaching itself to be a country. He records this from a great distance, as if surveying it from the far rim of a basin, the figures small, the voices thinned to wind. 3 memories. 8th sheet. The river that named the town he can no longer say. He draws it anyway, the bend, the ford, the fall. Because the legend remembers what the man does not. Because the line knows where it goes even when the hand that pulls it has stopped knowing whose hand it is. He feeds her from the cloth. The scraps go from a palm he looks at now the way he looks at any tool left out in the rain. Useful, unfamiliar, not obviously his. There is a brand on the wrist above it, raised, white, healed long ago. Someone was numbered. The amber eye tracks the bone point across the stone, patient, and then lifts, every time, to the face above the hand, and holds there, as if waiting for the face to recall that owns the hand at all. 2 memories. 9th sheet, then the 10th. The salt flats, the grade, a kitchen. Someone's mother stood in it. The color of the walls is gone. The smell is gone. The woman is gone. The fact that the loss belongs to him is going. He draws the flats still, the pan of them and the white crust drying at the edges. Corv's name slides off the morning like water off oilcloth. He keeps the line true. Dobrin sets a palm to the finished stone and says the seam runs clean to open water. The blind man weeps, the sound of it small in the cold. The cartographer records the weeping the way he records a benchmark, noted, located, unexplained. 1 memory. The hand keeps drawing. He has stopped asking it to. It pulls the 11th sheet north toward the place where the drift used to drain and no longer does, and the great cold animal walks unbound at the shoulder of a man it knows by a name the man has set down somewhere and not picked back up. 12th sheet. He sets the bone point to the limestone. The stroke goes north, even, unhurried. He does not look at the hand. There is a hand. It holds a stylus. It is finishing something large, something the whole rim leans toward, something 73 throats are saying aloud in the dark, so it will be true twice. The last line wants the last memory. He cannot remember which memory says the hand is his. A number. There was a number at the wrist once. The chalk is wet. The beast leans in, breathing its cold. The country is almost bound, and there is no one left at the stylus who will know he was the one who bound it. Only a hand, only a line going north, only the cold breath of the thing he freed waiting at the bars of a cage that is no longer there for a name that is no longer there to answer. 1 stroke remains. He does not know whose it is. 0. The count comes back empty when he calls it, the way a plumb line comes back when there is no floor to find. There had been a ledger of memories once. The ledger is spent. What stands at the stylus now is a pair of hands, a learned grip, and the cold, steady flank of an animal that has decided this body is hers to keep warm. 46 roads behind him. The 47th waits. He does not know they are numbered, but someone counted. The bowboy counted, scratching a tally into the rack's green wood. 46 imperial roads unmade and folded into the free country's spine. This one, the last, the stroke that closes the ring. The empire's road still runs east. He feels it, the way a tooth feels a colder tooth across the jaw. It is coming apart. Stone goes to gravel where the old surveyors set it. The milestones lean. A column of dust walks the eastern grade where a causeway held its line 1,000 years, and the herring gulls that nested in its culverts lift all at once, wheeling, finding no ledge where a ledge had been at dawn. The geography is letting go of itself. He records the gulls. He does not record what they mean, because meaning is a kind of memory, and he keeps none. 73 stand at the edge of the dissolving ground. They have gathered where the world is surest, the rim of the basin where Dobrin's seam runs clean to water. And they hold the 12 sheets upright in the rack, so the closing line can be read like a deed the instant the chalk sets. A country teaching itself to exist. Vesca runs the children through the legend forward and backward. Water, grade, ford, shore. So that if the hand fails, the marks live on in the throats. The bowboy parcels the last smoked herring, 1 strip to a fist, counting mouths against the league. Dobrin kneels with both palms flat to the cold limestone, reading the stone for where a line must want to go, and says the word the others take up after him, the word that makes a thing true twice. North. They say it like masons setting a keystone, each voice a course laid on the last. The hands lift the bone point. They are wet to the second knuckle with chalk and river silt. There is a brand at the wrist above them, white, raised, a number healed into something no one can read. Someone wore it, someone answered to it, was driven north under it. And the hands keep their grip and ask nothing. Shenya leans in. Her breath fogs the stone and clears it, fogs and clears, a slow tide working against the work, and the amber eye climbs from the point to the face above the hands and holds there, patient, waiting for the face to recall that it owns them. The face cannot. The 11th sheet is finished. The 12th wants one line only, the stroke that joins the drawn country to open water. The mark that either binds these 73 into ground that will hold their weight or spills the whole rim into the salt the empire is taking back. The grip knows the route. The man does not know the grip. Between those two facts lies the width of a single line, and nothing else, and no one at the stylus left to weigh which way it falls. The chanting stops. 73 throats go still at once, the way a flock settles to a field. And the only sound on the rim is the gulls and the gravel hiss of the eastern road unknitting itself and the wet animal breathing at his shoulder. Veska's hand closes on a child's shoulder. The bowboy sets the herring down in the ash. Dobrin turns his blind face toward a thing he cannot see and goes on praying at it anyway. The bone point touches limestone at the last benchmark. North along the edge, then the turn. Then the run to water. The root is there. The grip remembers it. The chalk holds enough wet for one clean stroke and not a finger more. The hands begin to move. Then the eastern road reaches the rim. The ground beneath the rack drops a hand's breadth, the 12 sheets tilting as the basin's lip gives where the empire's old geometry runs out from under it. And the children grab the green wood, and Shenya's claws bite stone, and the bone point skips. A hair, a fraction. The kind of error a surveyor measures once and never forgives, off the true line and on to blank rock, drawing a road to nowhere into a country that has one stroke of chalk left to live. The hand does not chase the error. It lifts the bone point a quarter inch, clear of the false mark, chalk shedding off the tip like the first grain of a snow that means to bury a thing, and it holds there, level, while the rim decides how far it intends to fall. Shenya plants. 4 legs locked, her spine a straight edge laid across the tilt. The ground settles a hand's breadth lower and stops. The sheets find their new angle in the green wood rack. The children's knuckles whiten on the frame. Dobrin's palms never leave the limestone, reading the drop, counting it down, telling the seam where the new floor lies. Hold, he says. Not a prayer now, a measurement. The hands wait 3 breaths. Then they come down on the true line, not where it was, where it is. The root translated a hand's breadth into the world's new shape, and they draw, north along the edge, the turn, the run to water. The chalk lays itself into stone, the way water finds the one channel it always meant to take, and the 11 finished sheets seem to lean toward the 12th as it closes, and the 73 throats pick the word back up, low, north, north. Each voice a course set on the one below it until the whole wall of it stands. The line reaches the salt. What the empire built to carry boots one direction, the stroke turns broadside to the sea, and the eastern grade that had been walking itself to dust stops walking, not mended, redrawn, its 1,000-year geometry unstitched from the word, and restitched to no one, to water, grade, ford, shore. The milestones do not stand back up. They are not needed standing. The herring gulls come down out of their wheeling and find a ledge where the new line makes one, and they fold their wings, and they sit. 47 roads. The ring closes. The basin holds. 73 pairs of feet stand on ground that will bear their weight tomorrow and the year after the next. Ground no will drew, and so no can fold. The bowboy is already moving. He scratches a 47th stroke into the rack's green wood beside the others, then sets the herring ash aside and starts counting mouths against the first true harvest, because a country that holds is a country that must be fed. Veska turns the children loose on the legend one more time, forward, backward, until the marks live in throats too young to lose them. Rolls, not ranks. The free lands sorting themselves into hands. 2 words inked along each sheet now, where a crown seal would have gone. Volnya Zemlyi. Free lands, in Veska's hand. A country signed by its legend and nothing else. Then the stroke asks its price. He feels it the way he has felt the others, a door closing somewhere behind the eyes. Except this time, when he reaches for the count, there is no count. The ledger gone to white, 311 spent down through 47 roads, to 0. And below the 0, surfacing like a benchmark out of silt where he did not know stone remained, a name, his own. 5 letters, the shape of a mouth that once made them, the sound someone called across a kitchen whose color he paid out long ago. It is there. He reads it once, clean, the way the brand could never be read. The chalk sets. The name goes the way the kitchen went, drawn over, bound into the spine of a country that will say North for 1,000 years and never once say who taught it the word. The brand at his wrist stays, unreadable. A number the empire pressed into a man to own him, healed now into a scar that owns nothing, names nothing, points nowhere. He looks at the finished map and cannot find the hand that drew it. Shenya leans her whole warmth against his leg. The amber eye climbs to his face and stays, patient, watching a man who has set down the last thing he carried and does not remember the carrying. Veska kneels at the 12th sheet, to the corner where deeds are signed. The space is ruled and waiting. She looks up to ask him for the name. He has nothing to give her, and that, he records without a word, is the whole price and the whole point. A free land keeps no master's name, not even its maker's, and the author of the world goes into it unsigned. Veska stands without the name. She rules a line through the empty corner and lets the blank stand for a signature, the way a benchmark stands for a height no one will climb to read. The rack comes apart in the children's hands. 12 sheets, lifted free of the green wood, passed shoulder to shoulder down the rim toward the basket that will carry them to the granary's dry shelf, where the bow-boy has already chalked a column for mouths and a column for grain and left a third blank for whatever a free land learns it needs. He watches the procession the way he would watch water run a grade he surveyed and no longer owns. Behind him, the road goes east unguarded, no toll. No Reed Skirley at the ford to weigh a man's papers and find them light. No seal to fold the way back under a name. The milestones lie where they fell. The herring gulls hold their ledge, and the salt takes the last chalk dust off the new line and carries it out as something the sea will not give back. He turns north because his feet turn north. The chain that pulled is gone. There was a chain. The brand remembers a chain even when the man does not. And the absence of it is a weight he keeps testing, lifting the wrist, reading the scar that says nothing now. A number pressed into skin to mark a thing that could be owned. The thing it marked is not here. What stands in its place is a man with a bone point in his fist and no master in any direction he can walk. And the walking is the whole of what he has, and it is enough to fill a morning. Shenya falls in at his left. She paces him stride for stride, claws scoring the limestone where stone gives. The 4 legs that locked at the rim's fall, now loose and rolling, her shoulder against his thigh at every third step, as if to keep a tally of him. The amber eye climbs to his face. It asks the old question. It waits, as it has waited, for him to recall that the hands at the ends of his arms are his to put down or to lift. He puts one down on her skull. The fur is warm where the sun has been in it. That is the whole answer, and she takes it and breathes wet against his shoulder and keeps the body she has decided is hers to keep warm, moving north along an edge it drew and cannot remember drawing. The country sorts itself behind them as they go. Rolls, not ranks. Dobrin's palms freed from the limestone, teaching a boy to read a seam by the cold that climbs through the heel. Veska bent over a fresh sheet, copying the legend so the marks live in 3 more throats by dusk. The boy counting, always counting, mouths against grain, because a country that holds is a country that must be fed, and a road that runs free must lead somewhere with bread at the end of it. None of it needs his hand. That is the measure of the thing built. It stands without the builder. He counts what is left to count. Not memories, those are spent, 311 paid down to a white page and a name drawn over. He counts paces. He counts the herring gulls lifting off the ledge in ones and twos as his shadow passes under them. He counts the warm places where Shenya leans, and finds they come at intervals he could survey, regular as stakes, the only chain he carries now, and the one he would keep. The road opens. It does not ask where he was numbered. Somewhere east a wagon will roll a grade no empire holds, and the driver will show no papers, and no Riskriskadi will rise out of the dust to fold the way back. The geometry is loose, the continent moves. A man may walk from the salt to wherever the salt stops being salt, and meet no wall a name put up. He cannot remember choosing this. He chose it. The two facts lie side by side in him without touching, the way a height and its benchmark sit a hand apart on a sheet, both true, neither needing the other to be read. The brand cools in the morning air. It owns nothing. It points nowhere. Shenya stops, sets her four legs, looks north up the open line, and waits. And he stands beside her in the one place on the new map that bears no mark. The surveyor gone into the country unsigned, and lets the road be a road, and walks it because she leans, and the leaning is warm, and warm is a thing he can still count. North, always north. No one ahead. A book the length of a forearm, bound in green hide gone board stiff, its spine cracked white at 3 places, where a thumb had broken it open the same way too many times. Veska finds it under the rack's bottom rail, wedged where the green wood met the stone, kept dry by the lean of the basket above. She does not call for anyone. She sits down on the cold limestone with the thing across her knees, and works the cover loose with the flat of her nail, slow, the way she peels a fresh sheet from its fellows so the page beneath will not tear. Inside, columns. Numbers run the left margin, 1 through 312, ruled in the same hand that drew the lines no road has yet refused. Beside each number, a word, or 2 words, or a phrase pinched small to fit the gutter, and at the head of the page where a name would sit, nothing. The corner is blank, blank answering blank, across the whole of the work. She reads the first line. 1. West grade. A kitchen. Color unknown. Her mouth moves on it. She reads it again, aloud this time, because the marks must live in a throat in case the hand fails. And the hand that made these is gone north, and will not be coming back to say them. The limestone takes her voice flat. A herring gull answers from the ledge, then doesn't. 2. The smell of rain coming. Sold for the ford at the second sheet. 3. A face, whose face is not written. She reads them in order, the way she drills the children. Water, grade, ford, shore, forward and never skipping, because order is the only mercy a ledger offers. The entries shorten as the numbers climb. Early on, he had words to spare. By the 80s, the hand presses harder, the letters lean. A man spending faster than he can name what he spends. 89. A song with the verses gone. 140. The weight of a child carried asleep. Paid for the Eastern restitching. Master to legend. Her finger tracks the column down. She is counting now, without deciding to. The surveyor's habit she caught from him, without knowing she caught it. And the count is its own kind of grief. Exact, refusing comfort, the only thing the collapse of him could not reach. The children come because she has gone quiet, and quiet from Veska is a thing they have learned to read, like cold climbing through a heel. The boy folds down at her shoulder. He has chalk on his knuckles still, columns for mouths and grain fresh on the granary slate. He looks at the page and sees what he always sees. Numbers, a tally, a thing to be kept. What is it counting, he says. Him, she says. What he gave for the lines. She does not soften it. She turns the page and reads the 200s into the air, and the boy's lips begin to move with hers a beat behind, catching the marks into his own throat the way she has taught him to catch the legend. And a second child takes it up, and a third, until the cost runs in 3 voices where before it ran in one hand alone. 211, his mother's name, the letters of it. 260. The road home. Every stone of it, given for the road that has no home. The salt wind lifts the page edge, and she pins it with her thumb. Outside, the country sorts itself along the new geometry. Dobrin's palms freed from the rock. A wagon somewhere east, rolling a grade with no concept at the ford to weigh it light. And none of it knows yet that it was bought, line by line, out of one skull, until the skull held nothing but a grip and an animal, and a scar that owns nothing now. She reaches 311, white, nothing written, the page he could not fill. Then the last, 312. The hand there is different, steadier, slower, a man writing the one entry he meant to keep, and what it set down has been drawn over, struck through stroke on stroke until the letters drowned. A benchmark inked out so no eye after his could read the height. His name, read once, by him, beneath 0, then buried in his own black line. She does not try to lift it. She runs her finger over the ridge where the nib bit too deep, the way she ran a line through the deed corner and let the blank stand for his signature. And she understands the 2 blanks are the same blank, the corner and this struck line. A height marked so a country can be built on it, set where no one will ever climb to read what it was. The boy waits. Do we keep it? He asks. On the dry shelf, with the sheets. We keep it in the throats first, she says, then the shelf. She closes the green cover and rules, in her own hand, beneath the struck name, a single clean line, the kind that levels a page when the work is done. The children carry the legend already. Now they will carry the cost beside it, 312 marks deep, said forward and never skipped, so that the road runs free over a price that has a record even where it has no name. The gull returns to its ledge. The page is shut. North, the line goes on, unsigned, and the ledger stays to say what it was signed with.